I'm recording everyone. Harry, make sure you take that off the screen, please.
Ooh, good morning.
Good morning, Babz. It's so good to
Jeff
see
Grant.
you. Happy birthday, Babz.
Thank you. I had a great birthday.
Yeah, I'm sorry we couldn't get to the soiree, but I saw some of the photos. It looks like you had a whole crowd out there on the porch.
Oh my God, it was so much fun. It was a lot of fun. Although I can't wait to come to your house and celebrate proper with you and Lynn.
Oh, I turned 65 in June, so we're gonna
Oh, 65.
I should hold up my Medicare card.
Well, you tell me what you want to do for your 65.
Yeah, I want to take Geritol.
Jeff, no one is more active than you. You have more energy than most 30-year-olds.
Yeah, well, you know how that is, Babz. It's a second life we live, my friend, right?
Yeah, well, listen, we are grateful to have it. How about that? So, well, let's tell people, welcome to Criminal Justice Insight. I'm Babz Rawls-Ivy.
And I'm Jeff Grant.
And this show is made possible by the sponsorship through the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven. Thank you very much.
Yep, and how? And I want to send love out to our loved ones, Andrew Kaplan and Lynn Springer. Thank you so much for being in our corner.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And some housekeeping and some news. I have great news. I am not going to talk about today because we're still. I know. We're still in a quiet period, but I alluded to it back in December when we had our show, and I'll talk to you during the week, Babz. But maybe we will even dedicate a whole show to it on May 21st. So we'll see.
That's going to lift a lot of people. I think a lot of people will feel very. They will feel as though they've got something to look forward to too.
Well,
you know what I mean? Like people will feel okay.
Well, it's really a community triumph. So that's the point, you know. So we'll talk about it on May 21st.
Okay.
What else is going on in your life? Anything interesting?
Oh, I mean, just trying to get through the pandemic like everybody else. Mm-hmm. I'm still working on a couple of film projects, which I'm very excited about. Mm-hmm. But I'll talk about them some other time. But yeah, I mean, things are good, so I can't complain.
Yeah, I guess the only other thing I want to talk about is that I had the honor of being a guest on Reverend Nadia Bolz-Weber's podcast.
I know, I saw that. I'm gonna go and listen because I met her when we were at
the Nantucket Project.
The Nantucket Project.
Yeah.
And I really like her a great deal. I have her book, and I think she's a quite interesting minister. And so I like to see two ministers go head to head and have real talk.
The transition from being a fan to a friend is really profound, because I've been a fan of hers. But you know what happens because she's gotten very well known with a bunch of bestsellers and a huge following on social media. And so I posted a social media post about it on my seminary, on Union Theological Seminary's alumni page. And I can't believe how all of my classmates and fellows at the seminary chimed in. Oh, that's my favorite podcast. I can't believe you're on it. So it's like I got to be a little bit of a rock star, just rubbing elbows with Nadia. So that's a cool thing. Yeah, lovely.
Okay.
Lovely.
That's good. Well, I can't wait. I'm gonna go and listen. I'm going to listen.
Yep. It's on our website, prisoners.org, or you can even find it on the Criminal Justice Insider Facebook page.
Good. Mm-hmm. All right. So we are delighted this morning to welcome Dr. Harold Dean Trulier, who served as associate professor of applied theology at at Howard University School of Divinity, the Mecca, as it is so lovingly called, since 2003. He currently teaches prophetic ministry, ethics and politics, ministry and criminal justice, and church and community studies. Prior to joining the Mecca Divinity faculty, he served as visiting distinguished professor of religion and public policy at Templeton Honors College at Eastern University. He also held faculty positions at Yale University, Colgate Rochester Divinity School, the Center for Urban Theological Studies at Geneva College and Jersey City State College. His administrative experiences include Dean for First Professional Programs at New York Theological Seminary, 1990 to 96, and Vice President for Faith-Based Initiatives at Public-Private Ventures, 1998, 2001. Dr. Trulier has lectured for university, church, and professional organizations across the country. He is a Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Morehouse College, where they make men. Morehouse makes men in 75. He completed his PhD work with a distinction at Drew University. Dr. Trulier is the author of over 100 articles, book chapters, essays, and published sermons. His important monographs include Faith-Based Initiatives with High-Risk Youth, the African American Church and Welfare Reform, and George Kelsey, Unsung Hero. He directs a national research and demonstration project called Healing Communities, mobilizing congregations to support those returning from incarceration through the establishment of family and social support networks. Let's see, through his research and activism, he has been named a fellow at the Center for Public Justice in Annapolis, Maryland, and served as consultant to the Faith and Families portfolio of Annie E. Casey Foundation. In 2014, he was named one of the 14 faith leaders to watch by the Center for American Progress. And he serves as a member of the executive session on community corrections at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. In March 2017, he was named Justice Champion of the Month by the Coalition for Public Safety. He is also a member of the 2017 Leading with Conviction Fellows of Just Leadership USA. Welcome, Dr. Trulier. That's a lot. You have done a lot.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
And I wanted to make sure I said as much of it as I could because it's impressive and it should be said out loud. So.
And Dean, we're so happy to have you. I know we planned on having you last year, but the week that you were scheduled, you got COVID. So I hope you're feeling better.
I'm doing better. It wasn't COVID, but it was definitely a stress-related condition that arose out of the COVID. I'm doing a lot better, and I'm grateful for another second chance.
That's beautiful. So, Dean, you and I first met when you gave a workshop, a Healing Communities workshop in Bridgeport, actually, at the Holiday Inn downtown Bridgeport. And I was so taken with your work to try to, if I can just make sure I'm phrasing it right, basically to create welcoming environments in churches to accept people who had criminal justice backgrounds. And I'm sure I'm not doing it justice, but maybe we can just kind of start from there and then we can go way back to your beginnings. So
Sure. I was working as a consultant at the Annie E. Casey Foundation, which Babz mentioned in the introduction. And
they have their roots here in New Haven. Like they've had their roots here. They were here in New Haven for a good while.
Yeah. Yes, I'll just leave it at that. I'm sorry, you threw me. Yeah, it didn't, when we tried to work with the New Haven group, it didn't work out so well. I'll just leave it at that. But I have fond memories of New Haven, having been on the faculty at Yale in 2001. In fact, one of my nicknames in the 12-step movement is Yale to Jail. It was 2001, I was on the faculty at Yale. In 2011, I was in jail, but I digress. So New Haven has a number of memories for me. So at any rate, when I was with the Casey Foundation, our senior vice president, Ralph Smith, pulled us all together, and he said, 2006 is going to be ground zero for prisoner reentry. We're anticipating somewhere around 675,000 men and women coming home from prison, not including the churn going through our county jails. And every department needs to come up with a strategy for how to address this large number of men and women coming home from prison. And so in the Faith and Families portfolio where I worked, which was dealt with religious organizations, we sat down with the Progressive National Baptist Convention, which had similarly decided to place an emphasis on, we were still using the term ex-offender back then. We hadn't graduated to returning citizen. What are we going to do about the problem of ex-offenders in the year 2006? And we met for a year with representatives of PMDC, Dr. Owen Cardwell from Richmond, Virginia, Dr. D.D. Coleman from Detroit, Michigan, a number of others. And what occurred to us was that the unique role of the faith community could be to provide pro-social attitudes and pro-social social relationships. Every faith community, every church especially, is found on belief and on community. And we know that the two most critical needs of a person coming home from prison is a new set of attitudes and a new set of relationships. So could the church provide that for men and women coming home from prison? Added to that, and Dr. Cardwell from Richmond was the one who made this statement. He said, with the sheer numbers of people who are incarcerated, it's virtually impossible that any church could not have members who have family members that are incarcerated. Why don't we start with the families in our own congregation who have somebody that's locked up, create the space for them to self-disclose and let them know that they're loved and that they don't have to bear the shame of being the mother or the father or the child or the spouse of an incarcerated person, and then help keep the family united through the period of incarceration and make that part of the landing for the individual when they came home from prison. And so that was where we started with the basic model back in 2006, 2007. And since that time, we've been able to work with congregations across the country. I can't even count the number because PNBC, the Progressive Baptist Convention, developed their own training module out of this. The United Methodists developed their own training module out of this. Southern Baptists took elements of it for their reentry program. The American Baptists are using it. So we know that several thousand churches have gone through some form of training or exposure to the model in the 14 years since we've been doing implementation.
Okay.
So Harold, Dean, I'm not sure I told you, but I served on Healing Communities Network with Steve Chinlin. I was on the board of directors for about 7 years. So weren't they affiliated with you too?
Yes. What happened was in 2011, we launched Healing Communities of New York. And we did it in conjunction with New York Theological Seminary, which, as you know, Jeff and Babz, has been giving seminary degrees at the Sing prison for close to 40 years. Mm-hmm. And one of the graduates of that program, Dr. Lonnie McLeod, passed suddenly in 2009. And so we partnered with New York Seminary and Lonnie's widow, Jackie McLeod, to start the Lonnie McLeod Annual Faith, Families, and Reentry Conference, New York.
At Riverside Church, no?
At Riverside Church.
Yeah.
And so out of that, we developed a network of churches in New York. Jackie McLeod was running that. And then she was approached by the group, the network, with your friend, to talk about pulling a merger together. Mm-hmm. So what made the Healing Communities Network of New York a little distinct was that it had two components. It both trained congregations, but also provided direct services.
Exactly.
And so what we're trying to say to congregations is we're giving you a framework that can work with families in your congregation, men and women coming home from prison. And if you want to add service provision to that, and you have the capacity to do that, then fine. If you don't, if you've got a church as small as the church that I was a member of in Philadelphia, which was an old storefront at the end of an alley, We didn't have the capacity to deliver social services, but we did have the capacity to support the families in our church who had someone in prison. We did have the capacity to provide an alternative set of values and ideas for men and women who were in the system. And we had the capacity to love people when they came home and provide a social support network. Any church can do that, whether you have 15 members or 15,000 members.
So, Doctor, how do you come to this work? What is your story, and what is your relationship to this returning citizens population?
I'm a middle class son and grandson of public school teachers. Okay, my great grandmother went to college. Most white people can't say that. So I. Very middle class, did not grow up in the hood, but by the time my neighborhood became the hood, my parents moved out. And so I knew that I was called to ministry. I went to Drew University to do my graduate work in religion. And I was working with a white evangelical missions group that was doing campus ministry, who decided that they would start working with court adjudicated youth. So they took a look at me, their only Black staff person, and they said, we're going to send you to Paterson, New Jersey to work with court adjudicated youth. We think you'll be able to relate to them because you're Black.
Of course.
Of course.
Right. You know, okay. I went there with my degree in classical music and my and my background in high school ice hockey. And, proceeded to spend 10 years in Paterson, New Jersey, working with court adjudicated youth, and then eventually becoming the chaplain at Eastside High School, where our principal, a guy named Joe Clark, had a movie made about him, portrayed by Morgan Freeman.
Yep.
And so that was a 10-year period for me of dealing with adolescents. I don't like the term juvenile because it's negative, but dealing with adolescents working in the court system. From there, I went to New York Theological Seminary, where I mentioned the fact that we had a master's degree program at Sing Sing, and getting all of this experience meeting people who are going through the system. I spent 4 years developing a national research project on the capacity of the faith community to address adolescent violence and gang membership and incarceration, and was doing all of this academic work and this teaching work. Meanwhile, alongside of Dr. Harold Dean Trulear was developing a full-blown alcoholic. And several times arrested for DUI, and then the third time convicted in 2009. I ended up going to jail myself. And I remember sitting in the barracks. I wasn't in the cell long. I've spent most of my time in a minimum security barracks. But I remember one of the guys in there who knew who I was. He said, well, you've been writing about us and teaching us and doing all these things for us all these years. Now you're one of us. And so, you know, I spent the year in the Delaware County Prison, Pennsylvania, and it became personal to me. And so when I came out, we had already started the Healing Communities work, but there was just I'll just say there was a different anointing on me, having been on the inside, having, you know, worn the prison tans, having, you know, gone through all of the stuff that we go through in those systems, the dehumanization, the lack of programming. I remember going to orientation, and the staff person who was directing the orientation passed out a handbook and said, read this, and if you have any questions, let me know. And he sat there for an hour and did puzzles while we read the handbook. At least those who wanted to read it read it. And you know, it was a wake-up call. It wasn't them now, it was us. It was, you know, and so part of what we do with churches is to take them out of the realm of the us versus them. You know, churches do prison ministry, they go visit prisons, but there's still this kind of us them. If the primary contact with the prison or the jail is Deacon Jones's grandson, or the pastor's daughter, or the musician's spouse, right? Now we've eliminated the us them, because now what we realize is that the church is already incarcerated. we have members who have been in prison or jail, with close family members. And one of the things, Jeff and Babz, that we've done is we produced a handbook. And one of the things that we do with the churches is we tell them on a Sunday, preach an appropriate sermon about the church's responsibility to prisoners. And we have a handbook that has different sermon ideas if you can't think of one. And then give an altar call for families of the incarcerated. Prayer. And I can tell you that in the 14 years we've been doing this, we have never had an empty altar.
How about that?
Black church, white church, suburban church, urban church, rural church. The smallest number we've ever had was 9 in a church in Northern Virginia, but they only had 12 people in church that Sunday.
And Dean, do you find that once people see other people getting up and coming up, that it kind of breaks through their shame and the stigma that they feel, or at least that they think they feel in the church, and they're more motivated to get up and self-disclose?
Yes. Oh gosh, I could tell you, like I said, 14 years I've got stories. My favorite one is also in Northern Virginia, and I was speaking for a Lenten midweek Bible study, and I was talking about the issue, and with the pastor's permission, I gave the altar call, and nobody moved. I said, okay, Lord, this may be the first one. And then I could have been 7 years old, and he's sitting next to an older woman, and he pulls on her sleeve and whispers something in her ear. And after he does that, the two of them come up, and then about 20 people came up. I found out later that that little boy, that 7-year-old boy, was sitting with his grandmother. And when he pulled on her sleeve, he said, "Grandma, he's talking about Daddy, isn't he? We should go up there." And that 7-year-old boy broke the ice.
Well, wow. You know, a child shall lead them.
He broke the ice. And I was in another church in Atlanta where I literally heard, "We don't do the altar."
Really?
And, yeah, don't do the altar call. And I'm like, okay. So I sat down after I finished the sermon. I preached, I think it was on Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And how powerful that verse is when you realize it was written when he was incarcerated.
Yeah.
And when I sat down, the pastor stood up and he said, "I'm thinking about my brother. My brother died in prison. And we were ashamed of him. So much so that I never even told my kids that they had an uncle."
Ooh.
He said, "My mother has always had peace because my mother never gave up on him. She prayed for him. She visited him until the day he died. Me and my other brother, we just threw up our hands and said, he ain't going to change," went on about our business. Threw my brother under the bus. He died in prison. My mother has a clear conscience. I don't. And I can't be the only one here who's living with the if I coulda, woulda, shoulda. And I cannot give the benediction until we do," this was the exact words, "I cannot give the benediction until those of us who threw our family members under the bus because they were incarcerated do business with God."
Oh, God, that is heavy.
And
that's heavy for me right now. I'm like, whoo.
He opened the door. I mean, and he brought folks forward. He's one of at least 3 pastors who have self-disclosed. In fact, the pastor of the church where the 9 people came forward, she had been asking me to come and do the workshop and preach and work with their church. And I told her I can't. And she kept saying, "Why not?" I said, "Until you're willing to tell the church that your husband's back in state prison, instead of the lie you told them that he has a new job working on Sundays, I can't do this. Because if you can't self-disclose, you can't work with the others who do." And so she's one of several clergy who use the opportunity to self-disclose. And by the way, I'm just kind of dialing it back over all of the clergy that I know, Jeff, that have self-disclosed as a result of this. They're all seminary trained.
So,
Dean, I've never told this story before, but 6 years ago, Babz knows, I fell into a deep depression 6 summers ago. And at the beginning of the Depression, before I understood that I had to go through like a mourning phase, this is like 7 or 8 years after I got back from prison, and I'd never really processed it. And I was attending at the time Northfield Congregational Church in Weston, Connecticut, with Pastor Bernard Wilson there. And I had guest preached at that church. And I had talked about my prison journey, but, I never really talked about my feelings. I'd never really talked about it. And so now it's Gospel Sunday, and they were doing an altar call, and they were anointing people with oil. And I walked into the back of the church late because I was so depressed I didn't think I could make it to church. But I walked in because I knew that they were going to be doing that. And I walked right up to the altar, and I got on my knees, and the pastor's sister, who's also pastor, she prayed over me. And because she could see that I was a shell, and she anointed me with oil, and I broke down in tears. And that was the start of my second rebirth, really, as someone who was willing to discuss my story in a way that is really authentic to me. And that happened in that church.
I believe that. Jeff, you're actually giving me permission to take my story a step further. That second healing, right, is something that I struggled with since I've been home, and I've had several relapses in my alcoholism. And my last one was I had one began back in the spring of last year. That's why I wasn't with you last year. I was in treatment. And the treatment journey this time, I hadn't planned to say that. I was going to skim over that, but you've given me permission. The treatment journey eventually landed me in a psych ward. And I realized that it's one thing to come home and to do well and to have support from family and friends, but it's another thing to heal, right? It's another thing to get past the nightmares that I had at least once a month that I was locked up again. And so I've dived on my language, my English. Oh God. I've divin deeply into the roots of my alcoholism and really working on underlying causes. And what I heard God say to me was, you've been a great advocate for people who've been incarcerated, and your own incarceration has been a major part of that. But I need you to dig deeper, because you've lost sight of the reason for your incarceration, which was your addiction and mental health issues. And that's where your advocacy has to increase as in this last quarter of your life. Jeff, you're 65, I'm 66. I got you by a year. I'm planning on living to 90, so I'm just getting fourth quarter.
Amen.
So this last quarter is really going to be mental health, addiction, and incarceration, because we've got to get in front of the pipeline. We've got to create alternatives for the pipeline, and we have to address underlying causes with alternative solutions rather than prison and jail as a one-size-fits-all.
I think you're right.
And part of what happens for us when we're working with churches is, to get churches mobilized around policy change. Watch this. You can't get churches to mobilize around policy change, around issues like addiction and mental health and mass incarceration as issues. Church are not mobilized by issues. They're mobilized by individuals. They're mobilized by facts. They're mobilized by faces. Mobilized by statistics. They're mobilized by stories. They're not mobilized by numbers. Mobilized by names and narratives. There's my Baptist alliteration for the day, right? So there, and so by putting faces on mass incarceration, by talking about Deacon so-and-so's son or brother so-and-so's mother,
Yeah.
or when I preach, I always give my inmate number. Every time I preach, I give my inmate number. I get the nice introduction when you gave me today, Babz. I always go Harold Dean Trulier 100026480.
I don't know mine. I don't remember mine.
I memorized mine on purpose.
I didn't.
Because
you see, Dean, I'm old enough that my inmate number was 4.
Oh God. Well, I give it because I'm trying to break silences.
Yeah.
Part of my role. And so I so by putting a face on it, we can move churches into that space for public policy change, because they realize they're not just standing up for change, but they're standing up for a better life for people they know, right? For Deacon Brown's grandson, for pastor's daughter, they are being directly impacted by whether or not residents of correctional facilities get COVID shots. They're being directly impacted by whether or not Pell Grants are going to be available to people so they can continue education and reduce their recidivism rate from 60% to 5%. They're directly impacted by whether or not they have access to hygiene products, right? The guy up in Maine who the state representative up in Maine who talked about by giving women feminine hygiene products in prison, running a country club year ago.
I wish they would have mailed all their feminine hygiene products to them.
But Dean, you can see where the concepts. I mean, this goes back to Rauschenbusch, right? This is where like the social gospel springs out of what's the church's responsibility, But I think the real teachable moment here is, and I just want to make sure we don't pass this by. And this is like cutting into the fourth wall here, right? The teachable moment is when you self-disclose your struggle, or Babz, when any of us self-disclose our struggle, we're not lying. We're not like just buying into the narrative that you come home from prison, you do hard work, and it's all bread and roses from there. I mean, this is like a living, breathing thing, and we have relapses, and we have bad days, and it's not just this straight line. We, on any given morning, we can wake up and feel like crap, or maybe it's a good day. Things just happen, and when we look at each other as people and we listen and we pay attention, then what we're really doing is God's work.
So Dr. Trulier, you made a good point about the pipeline piece. And I think this is, for me, the missing part of breaking into this pipeline. I mean, we talk about education, we talk about the prison, the school to prison pipeline oftentimes, but we never talk about the intimacies of that. And I think at the heart of all of that, a lot of that is the mental health. It is shameful that prisons, the U.S. prisons complex system, is the largest provider of mental health care in this country. I mean, that just makes, when we look at that, we ought to be ashamed, and we ought to be like, that should not be.
Yeah.
They should not be the largest provider of health care of any sort, but they are. And I think the mental health piece goes unnoticed in the prison population. I mean, people discount it so much, except when they want to, sentence you, they don't discount it. But it's discounted so much that if we can get in front of mental health issues, particularly with young people first, I think it would do so much to cut down how people get to prison, how people commit crimes, how people do all the things. I mean, if somebody would have intervened with me in my story at a younger age, I would have probably had a whole different kind of life. I would have had a whole different, or maybe I would have had this life, but without the piece of no self-worth and all of that helped propel making a bad decision that landed me. And I was already a grown-up, right? I was already a grown up in a full career. I had already had degrees under my belt. I had already had all these things, but I had never dealt with the mental health aspect of being a kid that was trafficked, you know, and that, like, it was never discussed. It was never dealt with. And even as an adult and attempting to sort of deal with it, by that time, it's so much to unpack.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you can't go back to being 12. You know what I mean? So I think that's a really good point that you made about getting at that mental health at the beginning of this pipeline, at the beginning of that. And if we could even if churches and schools and communities could marry around helping with mental health and doing something about mental health, I think we could make a dent in this march to prison.
Oh, no question, no question. I just read an opinion piece by Daniel Hahn, who's chief of police for the city of Sacramento, and he made such a point. I've heard other law enforcement leaders make the same point, that they have been relegated to cleaning up all of the social mess of society, and that we're not spending money on mental health, on education. He gave the example of a person with mental illness in his city in Sacramento who just churns in and out of the jail system because there are no mental health services available. He said, we arrest him, we book him, we lock him up. We have a 72-hour minimum lockup for mental health people, and then we put them back on the street. There's nothing. And he said our primary mental health facility closed 10 years ago. I have a colleague in Philadelphia who is developing a mental health and healing model for formerly incarcerated persons, because we don't have that on the back end either, right? Everything's about jobs and housing, very little on post-traumatic prison disorder, right? Or post-incarceration stress disorder, however you want to word it. And the kind of thing that Jeff was talking about, that we do peak and valley on the way as we try to reacclimate ourselves to society. So the mental health piece cannot be underestimated. I do salute jurisdictions like Cook County, Illinois, and Philadelphia County, Pennsylvania, who have made the head of their county jail systems mental health professionals.
Wow.
Their wardens, the lead commissioner, which goes for the warden in over in Philadelphia, is an LCSW, and Chicago, Cook County, is on their second mental health professional running the Cook jail, and so they should, because they're running mental health facilities, as you said, Babz. So to get in front of that, and to help the faith community, our new handbook is coming out this summer. And Dr. Chris Kamena is one of our staff people, who is a clinical psychologist as well as a pastor. He
was a guest on our show last year.
Yeah, he took my place when I was in rehab.
Exactly.
So thank you, Chris. He believed in me getting a second chance too. So he has written a chapter for our new handbook on the church and mental things that churches can do as primary responders, first line responders, and providing the kind of support that people need to make it through mental health crisis as lay people, right? So there's so much more we could do. And to be honest with you, what COVID, this is my personal belief, COVID has exposed how dependent we were on institutions and not on community. And as people of faith. And when this thing is over, we're not going back to business as usual. Kinds of things we're talking about today are going to be on the front burner. The number of people like myself who relapsed under COVID, right, alcoholism or addiction, is going to be on the front burner. The number of people who have been negatively affected by not being able to go to school during COVID is going to be on the front burner. There's no way. I see people prayed for COVID to go away. I believe God left it here so that we could get our act together.
Oh, that's right. Amen. I think that this is a movement that we have to really be cognizant of, because the funding is what becomes important, because you see that the money is really not going into criminal justice programs right now. It's going into wellness programs. It's going into health and human services, and they are generating a lot of the services for the formerly incarcerated population. And even when we're looking at the police now, the progressive model for how to treat the communities, it's begging to be a health and wellness model, and where the money is going to go for policing, and then for everything else that really requires some kind of intervention. But I think we're just in the infancy of this, but it's the money, where the funding goes, that's where the purpose is going to be. You can't do mission without money.
I agree. Let me, here's my spin though. I'm not very aggressive at looking for grants. I'll tell you why. I think the faith community needs to step up and pay for some of this itself. When I was at the Casey Foundation, we invested $250,000 in a denomination to get this work going. I won't call the name of the denomination. $250,000 between grants, between my time, between paying for another consultant's time to make this a national initiative. $250,000, and they had it in their own denominational budget at $5,000.
Wasn't UCC, was it? Because I'm a UCC person.
No.
Oh no! Don't tell it. I'm just.
No. I got art with the UCC, because they're like, well, we don't have any money to do this kind of work, So when I did my stuff for the UCC, I got a plaque. So thank you for my plaque, Babz. I'm thinking about selling it and getting $50 for the silver. Right, that's about that from your denomination, a plaque. Right, and no disrespect. My point is that churches pay for what they want, right?
Well, that's everybody though. That's government too. That's government. That's municipalities. That's yes. Everyone pays for what they want.
I don't work for the government.
Mm-hmm.
I don't work for municipalities. I work for the church. I'm an ordained minister. This is my call to. I won't even call it being on the front lines, because I work more with churches than I do with actual men and women who are coming through the system. But the church called me. The church laid its hands on me. And if it believes in what I'm trying to do, then the church needs to fund me and not rely on external. I mean, you can get the come along sides if you want. You can get the, you can go after the grants. That's fine. I have no problems. When Moses got the children of Israel out of Egypt, he took a whole bunch of government money with him. Okay. Nehemiah built Jerusalem with a whole bunch of government money. I'm just simply saying to congregations, be prayerful on your priorities, on how you're spending money, and get out of the culture of scarcity and into the culture of abundance.
Yes.
Right? Well, if we don't have this, we don't have that. Well, think about what you do have and how you can invest it in this population. In the time I taught at New York Seminary, so many guys came through that master's program who are just doing incredible things today, right? Ernst Ferguson, who's a bishop, pastoring a church in New Jersey, and is actually deputy police chief for community affairs for the city of Orange. Or John Valverde, who is the executive director of Youth Build, right? Julio Medina, who runs the Exodus Transitional Community out of Harlem. Mm-hmm. All these guys who went to seminary in prison, right? Who are doing incredible things, and no disrespect to the Barred Prison Initiative, who got all the publicity with the documentary. Yeah. But ES was doing this in theological circles years before Bard got involved, and has a track record, as Bard does, of producing people who are doing real leadership work and real transformational work. That's the kind of stuff we need to be investing in. And if if we're concerned about investing in people who are incarcerated, then probably as Christians, I would say we're in the wrong business, because there are a whole lot of incarcerated leaders throughout Scripture that God invested in, like Joseph, Jeremiah, a couple people who should have been incarcerated, Moses. Daniel put out a hit on his girlfriend's husband. Moses.
Gotta love the Bible.
Moses put a knife on a cop.
He was a fugitive.
Not Moses. Moses was a fugitive. Peter pulled out a knife on a cop in the Garden of Gethsemane. Right? So, and then several months later, he preaches and 2,000 folks get saved. Right? So, even if George Floyd was guilty, right? He was no more guilty than, and I don't think he was. Let me be clear, I don't think he was. But the people who blame George Floyd for what happened to him, you should never go to church again, because Peter pulled a knife on a cop and preached 3 months later. If you were in charge of the world, Peter wouldn't be able to preach.
I had a professor in seminary who answered the question in terms I could understand, that why the four Gospels are in disagreement, why there's so many holes in the stories. And what he said was, well, think of the Gospels as witness statements at a crime scene, right? There's four witnesses, there's a crime, there's four witnesses, and anytime you interview four witnesses, they're going to have different stories.
Yeah, that's right.
There you go.
So
all right.
Yep, no question.
So, Dean, tell us what you're involved in right now, because you're a professor, you're doing healing communities, you were traveling from Philadelphia down to Howard every week. Now you've moved down to the DC area. So what are you involved in now?
Well, I'm on sabbatical right now to do 3 writing projects. One, I'm working with the healing community staff to update our handbook, and that should be done this summer. We'll unveil it when we do our workshops for healing communities for the Loch Carey Missionary Baptist Convention in August. The handbook we've been using, which is on our website, healingcommunitiesusa.com, has been up there since 2008. So we want to update it. So that's just about finished. I'm also putting together a book of 52 essay meditations for returning citizens and their families, issues that they should be thinking about while they're making the transition back home. I'm 2 essays short. I should finish those by next week. And my colleague at Shiloh Baptist Church in Alexandria, Dr. Barbara Wallace, is working on questions for reflection to add to that. That should be done by the end of June. My part will be done by the end of May. And then I'm working on a textbook on spirituality and social justice that Jeff gets at some of the things you and I were just talking about, that we want to see social justice, we want to see social change, but not at the expense of personal spirituality.
That's it.
Church has done a really good job of separating personal holiness from social justice. And I'm thinking about the lessons I've learned in the 12-step program on the 12 steps says practice these principles in all our affairs, which means not just in terms of maintaining my sobriety, but also how I approach justice issues. And so I'm working on this text that will try to make a strong connection between personal spirituality and social justice, so that we don't feel as though we're making choices between the two, that either we're doing our personal holiness thing on the one hand, don't drink, don't smoke, don't, whatever that means to people, or we're doing the social justice thing, but we're struggling with our own personal journey. So that book should be finished. That manuscript should be finished by the end of the year. But the other things that we're doing is we're working on expanding our social justice offerings at Howard. Our dean has just gotten a major grant from the Lilly Foundation to underwrite education for Master Divinity students who are specializing in social justice ministry. And we have a certificate program for all of the seminaries in Washington, the Washington Theological Consortium, certificate on criminal justice and reconciliation studies. And that, I'm the lead faculty member for that. We have students from all of the DC area seminaries, Virginia Union and Lutheran in Philadelphia. And one of the classes they take in that is part of the Inside Out program. We're the only theological institution that is certified by Inside Out at Temple University to teach courses in the prison system. So I teach a course on ethics and politics at the Alexandria Detention Center in Virginia. And it's, as you know, from the Inside Out model, half residents of the facility, half seminary students. And they
so before we go, Doctor, talk a little bit about you personally and how you are dealing with your way to stay sober and on your path and like where are you with that and how are you managing and coping and thriving because we're still in a pandemic and the issues that drove you that helped you or caused you or pushed you to lapse are still, I'm sure, very prevalent, still there. How do you manage and maintain and move forward?
Question. Here's the way I put it. COVID didn't cause my relapse. It exposed the weakness of my program.
Ooh.
Okay. And so it exposed that I was doing too much on my own. I was not living in community. It exposed that I was not focused on my own personal spiritual development. And of course, this is part of what's behind the book. You know, I was still very active in the social justice realm, but I wasn't focusing on myself. So I have recommitted myself to the 12-step programs. I've recommitted myself to all of the principles involved therein, group and individual therapy as I begin to uncover some of the childhood wounds and learning how to silence. I'm sure you all have heard the phrase, you know, the inner critic. I'm developing techniques on handling the inner critic and getting out of the debate society in my head, not going upstairs by myself without a flashlight and somebody else.
It's dangerous up there.
It's dangerous up there. So the main things I'm focused on are discipline, you know, spiritual discipline, meditation, and community, being in accountable settings that help me to become a better person. And so I've been amazed at this stretch of recovery in that by investing in those things, I'm just less stressed. I have a better sense of what my size is in the world. I'm right-sized. Everything doesn't depend on me. I'm learning how to let things go. And I've got a supportive church. I've got supportive friends. My kids are very supportive. I have, some special friends in my life that are closer to me than others that I can talk to about anything. But I'm not the Lone Ranger anymore, right?
Yeah.
Stater anymore. That I had to give that role up in the treatment center. And it's sort of like when I was in the jail, right, 10 years ago. I said, well, you've been writing about us and helping us. Now you're one of us. You have to flip the switch. So, and when I do events like this, I have to be as honest as possible. And I just appreciate Jeff for opening that door for me by talking about his journey. So that, I'm not bragging on anything other than the grace of God, but so that I can just be for real. I don't have to flip switches and hide behind my degrees or my accomplishments. You know, I'm struggling when I go to a 12-step meeting or Celebrate Recovery meeting or anything like that. I'm the guy, you know, who has a brain disease, and it can take me out at any time. I've never seen the spirit of alcohol say, "Oh, we can't mess with him. He's."
So Dean, I'm gonna put you on the spot before we close. I'm gonna put you on the spot. I go to a recovery meeting every morning in Greenwich, but not on Zoom now, at 7 a.m. And for this arc, for these 13 weeks, I'm leading the 11th step meeting on Friday mornings at 7 a.m. So 2 weeks from today, okay, so 2 weeks from today, May 21st at 7 a.m., I'd like you to be our guest speaker at the Greenwich Recovery meeting and talk about the 11th step and pray with us. And so will you do that?
Yes, I will do that.
All right.
One of the promises, Jeff, is you know, no matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. So if you really how far down the scale I went, then I'll be willing to come. That meets the same time as my home group. My home group in Rockville, Maryland is a 7 a.m. Zoom meeting. So that time slot works really well.
Perfect. I'll be sending you the invitation.
Okay, sure.
All right, Babz, take us out.
Yes. Well, thank you, Dr. Trulier. This was a rich conversation. I appreciate your authenticity because it's so needed. And it was just a pleasure to listen to you. And I hope you come back and talk to us. I'd like to come hear you preach somewhere. So let me know.
Yeah.
I'll come. I'll zoom in.
I'll make sure time.
And thank you. Let's do a quick shout out for our friends at Just Leadership USA. You were a leader of conviction. What year?
2017.
2017.
That Just Leadership has produced some talent. Let me tell you.
Glenn Martin was here a couple of weeks ago with us, so you're in good company.
Yes.
And I just want to remind your listeners of our website, healingcommunitiesusa.com.
Okay.
And there are, and I do have sermons on YouTube, Babz, if you ever want to just.
I'm going to go look you up.
Okay. and we assume healingcommunitiesusa.com accepts donations, yes?
Yes, it does. Absolutely. We do.
Right,
Thank you. I'm so not good at that, Jeff, but thank you for prodding me. We do accept donations.
Good. Well, thank you. Thank you to the Community Foundation for making Criminal Justice Insider this wonderful journey that Jeff Grant and I get to take the first and third Friday of every month.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you to Lynn Springer and Andrew Kaplan for always having our back.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you to the folks who tune in and who stop me on the street and say, you know what, I learned something, or I heard something, or I had no idea that was going on in criminal justice. So
we'll be back on May 21st, Friday at 9 a.m. and with some surprises.
Okay. Thank y'all. Love you, Jeff.
Love you, Babz. Great show. Great program. Thank you, Dean. Thank you.
Take care, Dr. Trulier.
And
Hi, this is Babz Rawls from New Connecticut, and you're listening to WNHHLP 103.5 FM, streaming live at creativeindependent.org.
Dean, thank you. You were fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I
And-
appreciate it.
And thank you for that testimony, Dean. And you know, I've been sober for almost 19 years, and it can be a struggle any day.
Yeah.
You know, any day. So feel free to call me anytime.
Okay.
You can put me on your sober list. I'm happy to talk about it anytime. You have my cell phone number, right?
Yeah. That's let me see. What number is that? That's